Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Boker Tov, Gidon.
All right. All right. Vamos. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Ayin Ches. We are going to continue to learn about reduction, about being mema'et. When you have two chatzeros, one on side of the other, and there is a wall that's 10 tfachim tall or taller, separating them. If there isn't a chaloin or a pesach inside the wall, both chatzeros may not join the same eruv. Are they allowed to bring things up on top of the wall? No, even though we learned in the Mishnah that if the wall is 4 tfachim wide or deep, and therefore it is a standalone reshus hayachid, something that's already on the wall. Peiros may be used by members of both chatzeros. That's called that they are allowed to make use of it, but they're not allowed to be ma'alin. However, we learned on the Ayin Zayin that if the chatzeros, the floor of the chatzeros on one side is taller than the other, or in other words, if the height from the ground until the top of the wall on one side is less than 10 tfachim, and from the other chutzner it's 10 tfachim or more, so we give the right of usage, including bringing things up from the chutzner to the top of the wall, taking things from the top of the wall and bringing it down to the chutzner that doesn't have 10 tfachim, that has less than 10 tfachim from the ground until the top of the wall. So based on that, we are learning various techniques of how to be mema'et, the height, the top of the wall from the ground of the chutzner, allowing those members to bring things up and therefore to benefit more from the type of the wall. We're gonna apply the concept of reducing the height of the wall. B'negeya a whole other halacha, but in Hilchas Shabbos, as we'll see, that you can have a reshus hayachid, and perhaps if we are mema'et the space of the reshus hayachid, we can render it into a markaim ptur. Now we're going to learn another similar din, and we're going to learn our sugya the way the Rush explains it. Being mema'et, allowing one to be ma'alin, for that all you need is to have the floor of the chutzner to the top of the wall less than 10 tfachim. However, we learned yesterday that the whole concept of miut is only going to be used if whatever it is you are placing on the ground is either mamish on the ground or less than 3 tfachim from the ground. And because of the din of lavud, it's as if it's resting on the ground itself. What were to happen if you have a ladder and the lowest rung of the ladder is 3 tfachim or more higher than the ground, not laying on the ground? Well, then there's another din, which is that if the ladder goes either mamish to the top of the wall or very close to the top of the wall on one side, and similarly from the other side, from the other chutzner, from the other side of the wall, you have also a ladder. Even though the ladder's lowest rung is not less than 3 tfachim from the ground, so the concept of miut, the way we have been learning, will not be applied. But there'll be another din. Now you created the Pesach. Now you created the portal. Because since members of both chatzeros have easy access from one side to the other, there's a ladder that goes mamish to the top of the wall. And then when they walk over the wall, and we learned one din about that yesterday, as long as the ladders are aligned or the top of the wall is thick, then they can easily go over. Then you have a portal which will allow both chatzeros, if they so choose, to make one eruv. On Daf Ayin Ches Amid Beis, we're going to learn a new Mishnah that's speaking about a ditch that we already mentioned in the Gemara, a ditch that's 10 tfachim deep, that is wide 4 tfachim or more, is like a wall that separates both chatzeros, not even allowing them, if they want, to be ma'arif together. However, if you have a board that is placed over the ditch, allowing, again, easy access, a portal, people from one chutzner are now able easily to go to the other, then if they want, they have the option of being ma'arif one. And we're going to have similar cases where you have various houses facing the Reshus HaRabim. Each house has what we would call a porch protruding over, going over the Reshus HaRabim from the same side of the street. If, again, you create a board connecting one porch to the other, then members of both porches, if they want, could be ma'ariv, and many such similar dinim. It's, again, very helpful for Daf Ayin Ches, for people to have access to pictures. Again, you can be using a picture book, or many Gemaras today already come along with pictures. It will tremendously facilitate the understanding of the mitzias of the many cases that, God willing, we will be learning today. Good. So Chevra Daf Ayin Ches Amud Aleph, 4 lines on the top of the Amid, continuing Ve Amar Rav Nachman Amar Abba bar Avua, the following. Koisel Tisha Asar, if the wall from the ground until the top has 19 tfachim, says the Gemara, says Rav Nachman, Sarich Ziz Echad Latiroi, all you need is to have, as we learned in the case on top of the summit, that if you have this ledge that's projecting out of the wall with the important detail that you have a ladder whose lowest rung is less than 3 tvachim off the ground, a ladder that's not only near the ledge, but as we learned, the ladder that's mamish leaning on the ledge, making halachically the ledge to be viewed as if it's resting on the ground itself. And we learned that this ledge is mema'et. So if you have a wall that's 19 tfachim or less, one ledge will suffice, because as long as the ledge, if the ledge is 10 tfachim or higher off the ground, it's inconsequential because there's already a wall. So it has to be less than 10 tfachim off the ground. But then in order for you to claim that this chutzner has access to the top of the wall because there isn't a wall of 10 tfachim, then from the top of the ledge until the top of the wall, nachamol, you need to have less than 10 tfachim. So if the wall is only 19 tfachim, it works perfectly. You put it in the middle. Not you have 10 until the bottom of the ledge, nor do you have 10 from the top of the ledge until the top of the wall. But the moment you have a koisel, that's esrim, or as some Rishonim point out, if it's exactly esrim, since the ledge has some sort of height, it consumes from the esrim. It means esrim and a bit, or not, or we don't allow the thickness of the ledge to deduct off the height of the wall, one way or the other. Generally, if the wall is 20, then sarach shnei zizim la'atiroi. And it's always going to be, if you have a picture, the same concept. Guys, it's not enough for you just to have the ziz. What is of utmost importance is that there is a ladder that is going from the ground to the ziz, or from ziz 1 to ziz 2. And the rung of the ladder is within 3 tfachim from the ground or from the bottom ziz, and the ladder is leaning on the ziz, as we learned at the end of yesterday's shir on top of Daf Ayin Ches. And another detail, Amar Rav Chisda, this detail will be negate to something we'll learn still on this Amid, if the zizin are one above the other, even if you can somehow place a ladder connecting one with the other, as we will continuously learn, it's very difficult to climb up a ladder if the ladder is mamish standing vertically. At least so is the opinion of most of the Amoraim, and therefore we don't count that as a proper connection. The ladder has to be a little bit on an angle. We're going to learn later, ideally at a 45-degree angle. So in order for this to function, the zizin have to be separated, unaligned. In order for when you place a ladder from ziz 1 to ziz 2, you don't have to place the ladder vertically. You have enough space in order for you to incline it, which facilitates one's climbing of the ladder. And then we will use both of these zizin and the ladders to be mama'et the wall. Hope this is clear. Again, if someone here is able to put a picture up, that will be great. If not, let us use our minds even more. Says the Gemara, applying miyut to another din, not to be mamayit the height of a kaisel, but to another din in Hilchas Shabbos. Amar Rav Huna, Amud, that's b'reshus harabim. If you have a post, you have a pillar, you have a platform that is standing in the reshus harabim. If the height is 10 tfachim, gavoya asara, and v'rachav arba'ah, and the width and the length, right, is 4 by 4 tfachim or more, and this is what will define the top area of the post. The top of the amud will be a bona fide reshus hayachid, right? It's surrounded with mechitzas of 10, and it's 4 by 4 tfachim. And therefore, for example, if a person now were to take an item from the reshus harabim and place it on top of this amud, God forbid, that's a biblical violation of Shabbos. Now, if you would want to be mamai, to reduce the size of the 4 by 4 platform, and that reduction will be of significance, because the moment you have an area, even if it's surrounded with mechitzas of 10 tfachim or more, if it's not at least 4 by 4 tfachim, this is called a makim ptur, min hakotz el hakotz. So then if a person were to take something from the reshus harabim and put it on top of the amud, not only would he not be violating an isur d'oraisa, God forbid, he would not even be violating an isur d'rabbanan. The na'atz v'yaseit kol shehu, all you need to do is wedge a peg on the top into the top of this post, and that indeed will succeed, and halachically mi'atoi, that will now, you reduced it because it's unusable. Okay, that is the shita of Rav Huna. Now, Amar Rav Ada barahava, that ubegoiva shloisha, if the peg is 3 tfachim or more in height, I agree with you, Rav Huna. But if the peg is less than 3 tfachim, we consider it now part leveled with the surface, also based on these concepts of lavud. Weiter, Abaye v'Rava dominate Avayu. I disagree with Rav Ada barahava's limitation. Afal pisha ein gavoya shloisha. Nothing to do with lavud. If you have a peg wedged onto the top of this amud, it makes that part unusable. And therefore, it's not counted as part of the 4 by 4 tfachim. And if the whole thing to begin with was bidiyuk 4 by 4 tfachim, yes, you were mamayit. It's an additional leniency. And again, it changes the whole status. And that will be a huge kula. And my tama, because it makes at least the area of the peg unusable. It's only going up a tefach or 2 tfachim or a little bit, doesn't matter. You can't put something down on it. It disturbs everything. Rav Ashi is machmer to the opposite direction. Rav Ashi yamar afilu shegavaya shloisham. I disagree with all of this. How can it be mamayet even if the peg is 3 tfachim or higher? It does not diminish, it does not reduce the measurement of the top of the amud. You still have a reshus hayachid, my kama. I agree with Abaye and Rava conceptually. It has to do with your ability of hishtamshus. Well, people can use the peg because after the tole beimide, you can hang your hat on top of the peg. Amalei Rav Acha berei de Rava to Rav Ashi. Okay, I get your logic if there's only one peg. What were to happen if miloi kulei b'yaseidos? If the entire surface is going to be filled with pegs? And here, again, we're speaking about a metzias where it makes it basically unusable. So at least here, will you be maida that it's memayet, the 4 by 4 tfachim, and at least now will you be maida to the concept of Rav Huna, that it will be considered a makim ptur. So Amalei, Rav Ashi responds with a question, Loi shemi Allah chad amar Rabbi Yechanan. Did you not know what Rabbi Yechanan taught us? We have this in Shabbos Tzadik Tes. We have this in Yevamis, interestingly, B'ashgacha Pratas on the same Tzadik Tes. That what? That if you have a boyd, if you have a pit, the chuliyasam etztanaf la'asara. And the definition of a reshus hayachid is an area that's surrounded with mechitzos that have at least a height of 10 tfachim. And as we learned already in the beginning of Shabbos, doesn't mean high, it can be low. So if you have a boyd And the walls of the board, the indentation is not 10 tfachim, it's 8 tfachim. But when you dug the pit, the earth that you took out is by the perimeter, it's right around the pit. And that earth creates a mound. If you measure from the top of the mound to the bottom of the pit, if you have 10 tfachim, that's considered a board that has in it the mechitzos of 10 tfachim. Rashi says that when you learn the sugya, it's clear that Rabbi Yechanan's shita isn't only that the mound is counted for the height, but what's negate to our sugya, says Rashi, v'hu adin b'chalal haboid v'oivei hekef hachulyam mitztarfen lahashlam arba'a l'roichvoi. That if you have a minimum width and length of a hole, and you have to have 4 by 4 in order to have a din of a reshus hayachid, for example. What happens if the hole itself is only, let's say, 3 tfachim or 2 tfachim? But if you add the width of the mound, you have the other 2 tfachim, sum total 4 tfachim, or on each side 1 tefach. So as Rashi proves that Rabbi Yechanan's chiddush isn't only that you can use the mound to help you reach the measurements of the height, but we also count the width, not only of the hole itself, but you go from one edge of the mound, from the outer wedge of the mound, to the other outer wedge of the mound of the earth. All of that is included in the definition of how wide is it. And if it's in sum total 4, then you have to have a reshus hayachid. Now the question is, if you are using the pit itself, well, why wouldn't you say, well, I get it about the height, mela, but the width, you should have to weather the width only of the boir. And if the boir doesn't have arba'a tfachim, how will you classify this as a reshus hayachid? And what will be the answer to that? The answer to that will be that ein chanami. If someone is making use of the pit, then you would have to measure the pit. But since a person is able to put a board down on top of not only the pit, on top of the pit, and on top of it can be leaning on the mound of earth around it, and then a person could make use of the top of the board, top of a platform. So we consider all of that as the same reshus. And the same thing will come back over here to the pegs. And va'amai, again, why? As no one is debating that Rabbi Yechanan allows us to use the mound of earth also to be measured as the width of the blade itself. But why? How can you use the entire surface? When you use the pit, you're for sure not using the mound, which is beyond, which is above and outside of the pit. That as it is, it's not usable. But the manach midi, it's possible, it's potentially, you can put something on top of all of it, umishtamish. So Hachinami says Ravashi, even though there's a peg, if the top of the amud is 4 by 4, and you have many pegs, the manach midi umishtamish, the fact that you are able now to put a board on top of the pegs, in other words, as long as it is potentially usable, and it's always potentially usable, then it does not reduce, it's not mamayet from the 4 by 4. And unlike our dinim that Ravashi is maida, that we could be mamayet the height of the wall when vis-a-vis one of the chatzeros, we can't do that to transform a reshus hayachid into a makim ptur by wedging a peg inside of the top. Okay, let's come back over here to ERUVIN. And as we spoke out in the introduction, the words of the Rosh, without the words of the Rosh, the whole Gemara doesn't make sense. Because what we learned until now is that if you have something resting on the ground near the wall, as long as it is 4 tfachim wide, it reduces the height of the wall. And we don't need that to come near the top at all. We just have to measure from the top of that itztaba for the platform, from the top, from the rung of the ladder, from the top of the ziz. If from the top until the top of the wall, the first thing we learned today is less than 10 tfachim, memayet. However, the Gemara now is not exactly speaking about memayet, because the Gemara now is going to be speaking about someone who put a ladder near the wall, but even if the rungs of the ladders are 4 tfachim wide, but if they are 3 tfachim or more above the ground, as we learned to klal, that miyut ba'avir, lav shemei miyut, it cannot be mamayit. But even when you don't apply miut, now we're learning another din. If you have a wall, But if there's a ladder that goes either mamish to the top, we'll see a machlokes hamaroim, or at least less than 3 tefachim from the top, and on the other side of the wall, you also have a ladder that goes, again, according to some, all the way to the top, within 1 tefach. The most liberal opinion, the most lenient opinion is at least within 3 tefachim from the top, even though it's not memaye to height of the wall, because it's not on the ground, and miut ba'aver laf shmei miut, but it's called a pesach, it's called a portal, because people from one side can get to the other side. How is that different than a chaloin? It's not different than a chaloin. And what does that accomplish? It gives both b'nei chatzeros the option, they don't have to, of being ma'arif together. That is what the sugya is talking about. Good. So says the Gemara, Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Omar Shmuel, Kaisel, Asara, if the wall is 10 tefachim tall, and the first shita here is that the ladder to create a Pesach has to mamish reach the top, and we don't allow you to put the ladder completely vertically. I mean, you can put it vertically, but that will not create the halacha of a Pesach, because it's not convenient for you to climb up a ladder if the ladder is not on an incline. And the incline that we're looking for is an incline of 45 degrees. So now it's also a little bit of math. If the wall is 10 tefachim tall, and according to some Rishonim, it's not 45 degrees, but you have to put the legs of the ladder 4 tefachim away from the wall. That's enough, even if the wall is taller. So that's not a 45-degree rule, but it's about a 4 tefachim. So one way of learning, the other way of learning, bottom line will be that when the wall is 10 tefachim tall, if the legs of the ladder have to be 4 tefachim away from the wall on the ground, so what's the minimum height of a ladder? If the ladder has to reach the top of the wall for that ladder on this side and a ladder from the other side to create a Pesach, so says the first shita, that Sarich Sulam Arba Asar Latirei. You need to have a ladder that's really 14 tefachim tall. It's basically the 10 tefachim of the height of the wall, and let's go 4 tefachim away. The feet of the ladder are 4 tefachim away from the wall. As you can see in Tosfos, a picture of that. So that's shita number 1. So in other words, a sulam from both sides has to be 14. If it's less than that, if the sulam won't have 14 tefachim of height, then it's not going to go mamish to the top of the wall. And according to the first shita, it will not create the din of a Pesach. Next opinion, Rabbi Yosef Amar, afilu shloish asaru mashu. He agrees that it has to be placed for the legs of the ladder have to be 4 tefachim away from the wall in the ground. Narvos, then you don't need the ladder, according to the Rabbi Yosef's opinion, to come to the top of the wall as long as it comes within 1 tefach of the top. There's less than 1 tefach from the top of the ladder to the top of the wall. That less than a tefach is inconsequential, and it's called a Pesach. Abaya, again, is minded that the feet of the ladder have to be 4 tefachim away from the wall. The ladder has to be on an incline. But here he also goes to the concept of lavut. In other words, if the top of the ladder is within 3 tefachim from the top of the wall, then also ladder mitzad zeh and a ladder mitzad acher, whether they have to be aligned, we learned that yesterday, that depends on the thickness of the wall. But as long as it comes within 3, it's also considered as if it came to the top. And now the fourth opinion is lenient mishnei tzedadim. First of all, the Rav Huna B'Rei Rabbi Yeshua holds, like Abaye, that the top of the ladder only has to come within less than 3 tefachim from the top. It doesn't have to come to the top. It doesn't have to go within 1 tefach. Less than 3 tefachim are good. And he's the only shita that holds that the ladder can also be completely vertical. So now, how tall does the ladder have to be? It only has to be 7 and a bit, because as long as it's 7 tefachim and a mashu, even if you stand it up aligned with the wall, vertically to the wall, it's going to go beyond the 3 tefachim. It's going to be with less than 3 tefachim from the top. These are the 4 shitas. And why is Rav Huna so lenient? That's based on Rav, because Omar Rav, that Sulam Zakov Memayit. Rav holds that even if it's standing completely vertically, There is no incline, which makes it harder, but you can still walk up on it. We have a Gemara that it's memayet. However, Rav himself says, I don't understand the logic behind it because it's not that easy to climb. And right away, Shmuel tells him, Vilo Yada. Now, by the way, let's not forget that Shmuel was the first sheet to be learned right now that holds it does have to incline and it has to go to the top of the wall. So Shmuel is not agreeing with Rav. He's just wondering, why didn't Rav know? He says, Vilo Yada Abba, Taima Dahai Milsa. Abba, first of all, is the name of Rav. So perhaps he was calling him by his name. Perhaps Abba is a very respectful way of calling someone, like a Rebbe, Abba. Be that as it may, it's in referring to Rav. Why not? When we learned the case yesterday, when you have two platforms, and as we explained, the taller platform has legs, and the legs are 3 tvachim or more taller. So you can't just use the top of the top platform, of the upper platform, to say, if from there until the top of the wall, it's less than 10 you're mamayit. You need a lower platform. The lower platform was underneath it. The lower platform itself cannot be used for various reasons. Primarily, the case was because it doesn't take up 4 tefachim on the length of the wall. It's not 4 tefachim wide. But since that is resting on the ground, and from the under part of the higher platform to the top part of the lower tztabo, less than 3 tefachim lovud. But one platform is on top of the other. And we're not saying it has to be inclined. So just like over there, we had a concept when you were putting something on the ground. Let's go with the rush. We're not comparing the same cases, but we are applying the logic of miyut to the case of a Pesach. Just like when you're being memayit. Even if you have to use 2 platforms, we don't care if one is directly above the other. Technically, how will you get to the top of the top platform? You're going to use a stepping stone, the bottom platform. Well, it's one on top of the other. It's not like steps one on side of the other. It didn't bother us. So here also, it should not bother us. Mitzad Sheni, we understand why Rav says, I don't know the reason. Because over there, we're functioning miyut. Miyut means you are not using it. By the itztaba, it's not about you using it. Because even if you step on top of the itztaba, you're not near the top of the wall. Really, it's not about you. It's not making a Pesach. It's just saying that the top of the wall is under 10 tefachim from the ground. That's all you're doing. Masha'inkin over here, since the lowest rung of the ladder, even if it's 4 tefachim long or wide, is 3 tefachim or higher, so it's not about being memayit, it's about creating a Pesach. A Pesach is predicated on you using it. And Rav is saying, I don't understand the logic, even though that's my Gemara. Because taka, when a ladder is standing vertical, it's much harder to use it. No, it's had someone asked Rav a question. If he would not have had his own tradition, he would have agreed with the other shitas that it has to be inclined, which is shita Shmuel as well. Okay. Weiter. Amar Abba, Amar Abchia. The column Shabbat. The column Shabbat, we're not speaking about trees themselves. We're speaking about, as Rashi says, we're speaking about piskei de columns at Rashi. Sections of a tree, and not connected to the ground, pieces of trunk that were placed near the wall. Now we're going back to the din of either memayet, or if you made stepping stones. So if you made, don't think about a ladder that's inclined away from the wall, but have a ladder that's on the side of the wall, but you have a little trunk, then you have a taller trunk, then you have a taller trunk, and so on and so forth. And if you're using that as a way of getting to the top of the wall to create a din of a Pesach, we allow that to be used. Why? This is very important. They are an acceptable method of creating a portal, even if they are not affixed to the ground. We had that also in the sugya previously. Maitama, because kevedam kaivatam. It doesn't have to be something that's placed on the ground that halachically may not be moved. As long as practically people will not move it because it's heavy, we allow to view that as if it's affixed, and we can use it whether it is for miyut, whether it is din sulam pesach. Rabbi Yosef Amar Rabbi Shia, I'll tell you even more. Even sulam bubble ladders, the way they made them in bubble, these ladders were not as heavy as trunks. They were lighter. Even that, einam tzrichim keva, because they are also heavy enough for us to apply kvedam kvevatim. Now the Gemara says, man da amar sulamais kol shchein dekolim, because these pieces, these sections of palm trees, these trunks were heavier than those sulamais. Uman da amar dekolim avol sulamais nai, because they are lighter. Okay. Boy, minei Rabbi Yosef, meirabom. What happens if you have sulam mikan, the sulam mikan? Again, we're learning about a sulam that's lowest rung is 3 tvachim or more off the ground. So now you don't have the elevation, you don't have a miyut. You need to have a proper din of a sulam. Now a sulam itself, even mitzad dinei sulam, which will make a Pesach, every rung has to have the width of 4 tvachim. If the rungs don't have the width of 4 tvachim, which makes it difficult to ascend the ladder, it's also not going to help you create this Pesach, which will allow you to be ma'at of both chatzeros. So what happens if you have a ladder that the rungs are actually less than 2 tvachim? Less than 2. So even if you put 2 ladders, one on side of the other, the sum total is weiter not 4 tvachim. So you put a sulam from here, and you put a sulam over there, and then you take the cushion, you take straw, and you compress it, and you make that compressed straw as a piece of the rung. So you have a proper rung made out of wood. The center is made out of straw. Now, if you measure from one end to the other end, you have your 4 tvachim. But obviously, if someone is going to walk up the ladder, if they were to place their foot in the center, they're stepping on a straw rung, it's very unstable. Can you count it as, now you have the minimum width of a rung? Mahu. So Amar lay 3 lines from the bottom. No. That cannot be counted, because even though people can still use the ladder by walking and stepping on the wooden side parts, people, when they walk up a ladder, they don't do that. They normally put their foot in the middle of the rung, in the center of the rung. Ein kafaregel oila bohen. So it doesn't count as a Pesach. So then he has the opposite. What happens if koshin mikan, the sulam be'emsa? Again, you have a ladder. The ladder, which is in the middle, the wooden rung, is nowhere near 4 tvachim. But if you extend the width of the rungs by putting straw on one side and straw on the other side, so now you have a sum total of 4 tvachim. The center of it is taka solid. Do we say, I know that people don't go up ladders if the rungs are not 4 tvachim. Here it's 4 tvachim. The sides are weak, but people, we just established kafar regel is oil in the center. So Amalei, he was lenient here. So yes, this is considered a valid extension to the rungs. This enables the sulam to create a din of a Pesach of a portal. Daf Ayin Ches on the base. Next question. Right, these are all boys, right, that Rabbi Yosef is asking from Rabba. Again, if you have pictures, that will be extremely helpful. But if not, we can chop what's going on over here. So you have a ladder. The rung, the width of the rung is less than 4 tvachim. But what you do is that you make an indentation in the wall itself, and the ladder is placed. Now, being that we're going by the shittas that the ladder cannot be placed vertically, so you have to figure out that the wall maybe was thicker in the bottom and thinner on the top. In other words, what happens if the wall itself is carved in a way, and the ladder is placed exactly that now that if you measure the width of the rung using the wall itself from here that has a indented rung, and there, now you got yourself again for the minimum of 4 tvachim. So bekama means that this is a valid way of extending the rungs is a given. Of course it is. But as we have been explaining, that when we're speaking about using a sulam to combine both chatzeros, if the lowest rung is not within 3 tvachim off the ground, not within, it's 3 tvachim or more, so then you don't have the din of miyut. You're using the din of a portal. A din of a portal, as we had on Amud Aleph, we have a 4-way machlokes. But regarding it has to come either mamish to the top, or within 1 tefach, or within 3 tvachim. What happens if the ladder's rungs, you were chaykik lahashlim up until a point, but it's nowhere until the top. It doesn't, the chakika doesn't go all the way to the top of the wall. So once you get up on a certain height on the ladder goes until the optimum height, whether it has to go to the top or within 1 tefach or within 3 tefachim. But at the higher part of the wall, you would not choikik. So that's the bekama, Rashi says. How high up do you have to make a hakika in the wall to widen the rungs? Is there a point where we can say a person likes to climb up a ladder only if the rungs are 4 tefachim high, wide? But as long as you have it in the lower parts of the ladder, once you come to the top, it doesn't bother you that it got narrow. So Amalei, indeed, you only need ba'asara. And even if the wall is much higher than asara, and from that part of the wall all the way into the top, you were not chakak lahashlim, but you have a ladder. Here, I don't care that the rungs are not 4 tefachim wide. Amalei, what about chakakai kule b'koisel? What happens if you don't have any ladder? If you are making indentations in the wall, right? Wall climbing that our kids love, that the wall itself becomes a ladder. Now, as we learned on Amud Aleph, that's vertical and that's a lot more difficult. Maybe a lot more difficult. You would have to have the width of 4 all the way until the top. Bikama, and indeed, Amalei Malikumase. And Ayu, what's the difference? He says very pashut. Amalei Hassan mistalikly. There, when you have a ladder to begin with is a lot easier to be mistalik. Mistalik means to go up. You can go up to the top with a ladder. When you have a wall that you made holes for you to stick your feet in, so to say, the wall itself becomes your ladder. That to begin with is harder. At least, if you're using that, you have to have the width of every chakika, 4 tefachim, all the way until the top. Since lemistalikle, that's why he said, Maloi kamasi. 3 lines. 4 lines from the top. What happens, again, when you want to create a Pesach to be ma'arif both chatzeros, and you don't have a ladder, but there is a Elon mamish adjacent the wall, and people can use the Elon easily as a ladder. But we learned there's an Isur midrabanan to go up on a tree. Actually, that Isur is not only not to go up because you might be kaiser, but there's even an Isur to be mishtamish be'ilan even if you're not going up on the tree. Oh. Now, if you remember earlier on in the Masechta, Rashi reminds us on the Lamed Beis, we had a machlokes Rebbe and the Rabbanan regarding someone who placed an eid of tchumen in a tree. Being that the eid of tchumen has to be something accessible, and also lishamish be'ilan, Rebbe nevertheless was lenient because Rebbe held that since an Isur Midrabanan does not go into effect, l'tzoyrech mitzvah, bein hashmashos, therefore, and the eid of tchumen only has to be food that you have access to during bein hashmashos. So therefore, if you put your eid of tchumen in an Elon, you're still good to go. Now here, do we view the need to be able to go over the wall by using the Elon as something that's needed only bein hashmashos or for the whole Shabbos? And here we'll see it's for the whole Shabbos. So says the Gemara, this boya is both l'Rebbe and l'Rabbanan. And the Gemara speaks it out. The boya l'Rebbe, at kan l'kama Rebbe Hassan, that if you place an eid of tchumen in a tree, it's okay because kol davar shu mishum shvus lo ygazer olav, and lo ygazer olav we added over there bein hashmashos l'tzoyrech mitzvah. But hanamili bein hashmashos. Let's just focus on that. Avol kuli yom eloi. And we need for the ladder, which is creating the Pesach, which is giving us the option of ma'arav echad to be there the whole Shabbos. Does it de facto have to be there the whole Shabbos? Lav dafka, many the Shaitim say. But at least when it's placed there from before Shabbos, it's placed in a way that it could be used the whole Shabbos. And if it's a tree, which is asur midrabanan, certainly after bein hashmashos, so from the beginning, we knew that it may for sure not be used the whole Shabbos. It won't be good. Or, Dilma, even when Rabbanan that hold that if eid of tchumen is placed in a tree, it's not a valid eid of tchumen. Why not? Because there we need a halacha, your kind of shvisa, you have to have access to it. You don't have access to it. That is what counts. You don't have access to it. Over here, argues, that's one side of the boya of Rabbi Yosef. I know that halachically you may not use it. So what? But it's still a door. And we're using a very interesting expression, and perhaps it's not only used by a Darabanan, but as we'll see soon, even by a Doraisa, that when something physically, the Mitzias, is something that could happen, there's an action that could be taken. You could climb up this wall by using the tree. Elama, God said, the Rabbanan said, don't use the tree. So it's as if the Lashon here is that there is a lion. What happens if there is a lion sitting on top of the ladder? Adiyeh de Rava alei. And because of the lion, you are afraid to go up. Does it take away the validity of the Pesach? Let's say there's a chalain. Let's say there's a door, but there is a lion sitting in the doorway. What, you can't be ma'arav echad? Yes, you could, because there's a Pesach. De facto, you won't use it. Well, you're not using it because you are afraid of the lion. So maybe we should view Isurim. I know it sounds more by an Isur Darabanan, but we'll see we're going to apply this perhaps even by an Isur Daraisa. Pischahu, there is a tree. From this side, there's a tree from that side. You can easily walk over from one side to the other. That's called a portal. That's called a Pesach. Halacha says you can't do it. I'll never use it. But you can't say there's no Pesach. Now Rabbi Yosef asks another question, because here it's an Isur Darabanan. One might say that by an Isur Darabanan, you can argue that even though we have to abide by Takanas Chachamim, but it's intrinsically okay. The Rabbanan told me not to do it, as some Achreinim claim, which is not the sheet of the Alter Rebbe, that one of the differences between the Isur D'Oraisa and the Rabbanan, so says the Nesivis, is that an Isur D'Oraisa affects an Isur Chefze. Isur D'Rabbanan only affects an Isur Gabra. We know this al pi Chasidus. The Alter Rebbe says it's clearly not true. The Chayis, that's Machaya, whatever physical thing that is now also with the Rabbanan, goes down from Klipas Mega to Sholosh HaKlipas HaTmeis, which is really the definition of an Isser Chefze. But anyways, back in the Gemara, next case is by Isser D'Oraisa. Asoyel Asheda Sulamah. If you have an Asheda tree, one may not derive Hana'ah Midoiraisa from a tree that was planted L'Shem Avodah Zarah. Now, actually, this is also a topic that we learned before. Machlokes Tanoim. There the case was someone put the Eid of Tchumen inside a kaver. And one may not derive benefit, not from a mace, nor from anything that's designated for the mace, including the kaver itself, the tomb, the malasim, the kaver. So Tabayla Rabbi Yehuda, Tabayla Rabbanan. Now Rabbi Yehuda said that you could place native Tchumen inside a kaver, but he explained why. Tabayla Rabbi Yehuda at kan lekam Rabbi Yehuda Hassan and Daf Lamed Aleph the mutar liknois bias bi surayana. Again, we explained Ella Hassam, the Basar, the Kanale, Eidov, Lenichalei, Lenintar. The person is completely indifferent whether the Eidov will actually be protected or not. We don't need the Eidov to last for the whole Shabbos. You don't need the protection of that kaven, Malasium. I'm getting the word wrong. We don't need that. 1 second. But you do need it to be there when Shabbos comes in. So we also learned above the Shita that an Eid of Tchumen can only be made with Tzorech Mitzvah. Next time I want to go Shpatzirin another more than the 2,000 amos, but because there's a Shiur Torah or there's some Bikur Chaylim, and Mitzvah Lav Lahanis Nitnu, as we explained all above in Daf Lamed Aleph. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not being Mahane, you're not getting Hana'ah from the Kaver. But over here, in order for you to use the portal, you're getting Hana'ah from it. And you can't be Mahana from an Asheda. And same thing can be in the reverse. That over there do not allow you to put the Eid of Tchumen inside a kaver. Here they might say that you could use an Asheda as a portal. You could be Ma'arav Echad. You can't use the tree. Again, is the portal not there? The portal is there. God said, don't have enough from an Asheda. So it's like a lion standing inside of a doorway, which will not allow you to use it. But it doesn't mean the doorway is not a doorway. Pischahu and Va'ariyah the Ravi Alel, even by Nisur D'Oraisa. Okay, all of these are the questions that were asked from Rabba. And Rabba now tells Rabbi Yosef like this: Ilan mutar, Ashera asura. In other words, his approach is whether something that's asur becomes, let's say, intrinsically asur, or whether we view it as an external isur. He holds it depends. Isur D'Oraisa, Isur D'Rabbanan. Isur D'Oraisa makes it intrinsically asur, so therefore it's not a portal. Isur D'Rabbanan, the Pesach is there. You can't use it. Say that it's like a lion is sitting on top of it. However, not everyone agrees with that. Now, Rab Chizda disagrees, but it's presented as a kasha. Maskav lo Rab Chizda, Adarabba. I'll tell you, Bayan Elon, since she'isur Shabbos goyim loy, it's only an isur derabanan, but it's related to Shabbos. That's worse, because here we have to create a Pesach l'tzoyrech Shabbos. The whole need of ERUVIN is for Shabbos and Yom Tov. So I'll tell you that this tak is asur. By an Ashera, the isur of an Ashera is not Shabbos related. I'll use it as an external problem. It's related every day, 24/7, but it's not unique to Shabbos. I'll argue that loy netzar, and as actually the Rashba adds another nuance that an Ashera can become batal. And with all the nuances, if an Avodah Zarah belongs to a Yid, we can never be mavatal it. But if an Avodah Zarah and Ashera belongs to a Goy, it could become nullified. All of that just is an indication that it's not an intrinsic problem. It's a imposed outside problem. Anyways, Rab Chizda says the opposite of Rabbah, and indeed, Itmanami, Kiyasa Rabban, Amar Rabbi Lazar, or Amar Rabbi Yechanan, the latter opinion, Kol She'isr Shabbos Goyim Loi, then Asur. Asur means, not Asur. Asur means it does not serve as a Pesach. You can't make an Eruv together. That's for Asur. Kol She'isr Davar Acher Goyim Loi, even if that is an Isur Doyer I saw, even if that's Isur Chamar Avodah Zarah, there is where we do view it as a Aliyah Daravi Aleh, and therefore it is mutter to be used as a Pesach, and you could be ma'arif together. Wow. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Masni Hachi, he had a third version that bidiyuk when Rabbah asked a question to Rabbi Yosef, when he was trying to disentangle this to Rebbe and the Rabbanan and to the Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan, no, it's connected. That Elon is a pluk to the Rebbe and the Rabbanan. Rebbe that allows you to put an Eid of Tchumen and an Elon because Bein Hashmashes. Same thing over here. Yes, that as long as you have a Pesach Bein Hashmashes, and now the Tzorech Mitzvah issue is the whole issue that everyone speaks about over here. It's going to be okay to make it into a Pesach. The Rabbanan that disallow placing it of Tchumen in a tree, Isur Ishtamshus Be'ilan, will likewise say over here you can't make an Eruv together. And Ashera is the pluk of Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. And the way Tosfos, the third Tosfos, points out how Torah is rich, that even though we learned on Daf Lamed Aleph, that L'Kula Alma we learned that Rabbi Yehuda, only, as we explained, you don't need it to be guarded, and it's because it's only L'Tzorech Mitzvah, and Mitzvah Lav Lahenos Nitnu. Obviously, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak doesn't agree with any of that. Doesn't agree with any of that. He understands the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan differently, and which is why we could link it over here. According to Rabbi Yehuda, basically, it doesn't bother me that you're using something that you may not have hana'ah for to be kind of shvisa. And similarly, Rabbi Yehuda will hold it doesn't bother me that it's asur b'hana'ah. I'm not going to use it, but still there's a din Pesach, and therefore you can be ma'ad of one chatzar with the other. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we have time. Let us begin now the new Mishnah. The concept was, we already learned yesterday, or 2 days ago, that just like a wall in the height separates two chatzeros, a ditch that is 10 tefachim deep is also chaytzeitz, it separates two chatzeros. The ditch not only has to be 10 tefachim deep that goes across the entire length between both chatzeros, but it has to have a width of 4 tefachim. Here, the width of 4 tefachim is not to create inside of it a reshus hayachid. Because when you have a ditch, when you have a crack in the ground, if it's less than 4 tefachim, people will step over it. By the way, 4 tefachim, you think about 4 tefachim, you will also step over, but people already pause. Ooh, it's deep. It separates. If it's less than 4 tefachim, it's garnished. But if it's 4 tefachim deep, says the Mishnah Charetz, shebein beis chatzeiros, and it's important that this charetz, this ditch goes across the entire boundary of these 2 chatzeiros. If it's Amek Yud and V'roichev Dalid, this is mamish like a wall without a window, and therefore Ma'arvin Shnayim, the Ein Ma'arvin Echad, because these 2 chatzeros are totally separated. Now, what happens if the charetz is filled? When do we say that whatever is in there now filled up the charetz? At least the charetz doesn't go all the way 10 tefachim to the ground, or maybe it goes all the way to the top. So here the Mishnah says, even if you filled up this ditch with stubble or straw, all right, This is not about muksa, not about muksa. It's about the kavana of the one who put these items in the ditch. If the person stored it there temporarily, which is the case of the kashrei tevin, people need it, whether later for construction, which makes a muksa. We're not going to get into that right. You're going to feed it to your animals. So if it's not lent and stam is not left there permanently, so even though now the ditch is filled, we don't view it as filled. It's still a wall. It's still a division. But if and here, yes, the Gemara will be medayik, even though it's stama, the owner, the guy who put the earth or the pebbles, did not explicitly say whether he's going to leave it there or not. But we assume this is something that he'll leave. So therefore, if it's left there permanently, so then it closes up the ditch. And therefore, you don't even have an option to be ma'arif shnayim because there's no wall, there's no divider. Everyone is living in the same one chutzner. And as we keep on learning, even if only one member of one chutzner is not ma'arif, he ruins it for everyone, unless later he does a bittul, but everyone has to be involved in one way or the other. Now, you have the ditch. It's 4 tefachim wide. Nothing is in it. You got a divider. What happens now if you put a board, a bridge? So nasan olav neser, it's mamish like the din of a window. If the board is less than 4 tefachim, that's not called a pesach. That's not called a chaloim. But if sherachav arba'a tefachim or more, now you have the option. Now you have an option because it's separated chatzeiros with an option to go one with the other. As the Mishnah will say, either ma'arav shnayim ve'im ratzu, they can be ma'arav echad. Another similar case where you have an option. You have 2 balconies, and if you have a picture, it helps. But yeah, you can use it in your mind. We're speaking about houses that face the Rishus HaRabim from the same side of the street. One house and another house has this gezustara, has this porch, we will call it, this platform that's protruding out. It's a balcony. Each balcony belongs to another house or to another balabatim that make use of the balcony. So it's separated. But if it's zu keneged zu, even though they are precisely one near the other on the same height, but you can't get from one to the other, right? How are you going to get there? You're going to jump? That's not called connected. Ma'arvin shnayim, ve'im ratzu ma'arvin echad. Oh. But if they want, they can be ma'arev echad. Oh, so Rashi adds, when can they be ma'arev echad? If you placed a board connecting the 2 balconies. They're separate to the shuyos, but that's the v'chein. But if you have the nesed, that's wide at least 4 tefachim, that allows someone from this balcony to walk on the board to the other balcony, then in both cases, ma'arv shnayim v'ma'arv echad, but pachos mikan, if the board is less than 4 tefachim, in both cases, sai the 2 chatzeiros with the board over a ditch, sai in the case of the 2 balconies with a board, but not rachav arba, then it's not considered a connection, and therefore ma'arvin shnayim ve'em ma'arvin echad. Okay, so let's begin with the Gemara. Says the Gemara of a tevin l'chayitz. The Mishnah says that if you filled up the chayitz with tevin and kashrei tevin, it's by default not considered left there permanently, so it doesn't close the gap. But didn't we learn that matbein is a haystack? Masbein, a haystack that separates 2 chatzeiros. If it's told 10 tefachim, that's called a proper separation. In other words, we do view a haystack as something that separates chatzeiros. So Abaye says, so what? Even if that haystack is also not going to be left there permanently, but the rules of a mechitza versus the rules of a chatzitza are not the same. The person is going to take the haystack out tomorrow. Now there is a complete division across. But Ali and chatzitza, you want to say that even though there is a charitz, but the charitz is not called a charitz. Why? No. If something is in there, but it's only there temporarily, batle means that the person plans to be abandoned there. If you plan to leave it there, then take a chayitz. But v'iloi batlei, then loy chayetz. Now, it says the Mishnah, if you fill it up with earth, earth is viewed by default as if you're leaving it there permanently. No, asks the Gemara, which is the contrasting the offer with the Tevin. But l'chura, did we not learn a Mishnah in Alois, the simple rules of Hilchas Tuma, that if you have a mace in a house, if there is at least one tefach of vacuum, of halal, of airspace between the top of the mace and the oil, then anything under the oil is tummy. But the oil does not allow the tomb of the mace to go above it. But if the mace is in a house and it's filled, in other words, there isn't even a halal tefach, that's called the tuma retzutza boikaas va'oila an until the heavens. So what happens if there's a mace in a house, as the Mishnah, bayishemilo teven oitzeroidos. Teven is in the same category of tzeroidos. So says the Mishnah, if the person is abandoning the teven or the tzeroidos there, bitloi, then batal. Ubemela, it's called tumah retzutza. There is no oil because there's no halal tefach. End of Mishnah. But clearly the Mishnah is saying that in order for you to consider the tzeroidos as filling up the space, that's only if you were mevatel. That means you verbalize that you plan to leave it there. Bitloi in daf ayin tes like bitloi loy in our Mishnah's mashma that if you put tzeroidos in a ditch, even if you didn't you did not say you're leaving it there. You didn't verbally abandon it. Stama rocks you're going to leave in the charitz. So indeed, we're going to continue. We're just starting this. Amar Afuna. Yes, these two Mishnayos don't go together. However, Mantana Ahalois, which is the Mishnah we just quoted in the bottom of the Amid, that's Rabbi Yossi, and our Mishnah follows the Chachamim, who are of the dissenting opinion. We'll stop over here, God willing, to be continued tomorrow.
Chazak Baruch.
Good.